Inside baseball, normally with the graphics, I try to do everybody justice. If there's a big height disparity, I try and make everybody match up. This fight's going to look cartoonish and wild. We have Sweden's Bea Malecki taking on Josiane Nunes from Brazil. And Matt, this is our first opportunity to give shouts to our second channel. It's 15-minute card breaks, and if you haven't checked it out, we get some great videos over there. We open a few blaster boxes of the first edition of Panini Prism. We also opened some UFC striking signatures. We got a Gerald Meerschaert. I was excited about it. All that being said, we already gave Josiane Nunes her flowers. We pumped her tires. We gave her a great introduction. She was originally supposed to fight France's Zara Farron back quite some time ago. Unfortunately, Zara Farron missed weight by epic proportions. And Josiane Nunes has been on the shelf for a number of months, but she still has that UFC contract. She still has a shot to take on Bea Malecki. So we're going to throw it back to the rookie review. We're going to talk a little bit about Bea Malecki, and then we're going to offer up our preview and a prediction. Like I said, she's taking on Brazil's Josiane Nunes, and I've watched a lot of her fights. There's a lot of tape out there. It might not be the best shot stuff, but you can find it out there. She's a Muay Thai expert. She's a southpaw. She is gotta be the shortest bantamweight in this division. She's 5'2". She stands really low. She throws a lot of power kicks. She looks like she's tired from the first second of the fight. She throws in combination. She's got power on single shots. But the best thing that Josiane Nunes does, it's something that Andre Arlovski does well. Up on top of this card, she will blitz forward and land with power. And once she backs her opponents up to the fence, it's, to steal a phrase from Michael Chiavello, it's good night, Irene.
It will be interesting because you, again, as someone mentioned it, the clinch game of Zara. If she is able to clinch up, get a nice Muay Thai clinch, and throw knees up the middle, those are going to be really hard for Nunes all night. But the problem with that is going to be Nunes is going to be able to throw all those body shots and really get on the inside that much easier.
The plum clinch is actually Josiane Nunes' best position. It's even against taller opponents, that's been her best position. So let's focus on Josiane Nunes a little bit more. We'll break it out. She got signed to the UFC a little bit ago. She's an MTK fighter. She's been signed with them for some time. And again, very much a Muay Thai fighter. It's not just because she wears the Thai trunks. You see it in her training. You see it from where she's coming from. She's out of Striker's house. But this is the really interesting thing. You look at these two records. From Nunes, the one loss, it's against Taila Santos. Okay, that's going to happen. Go over to her Instagram, see where she's training out of. I said Striker's house, and it is primarily there. But she also spends time at Astra Fight Team with Viviane Pereira. Maybe didn't have the best run in the UFC, but still
good training.
Was UFC caliber. Fought really good names, actually. And Taila Santos trains there. So they all train together. I love that for Nunes, who, again, you watch these fights and you go, geez, I can't get a read on her. And honest to goodness, it is hard to get a read on her. The one thing that I really don't like is the fact that she is a fish out of water when it comes to wrestling and grappling. She is bad at it.
We have two of those, Craig.
Exactly. She gets taken down very easy and controlled. If you go back and you watch her second to last fight with Dione Barboza, that was a fight where Barboza had Danilo Marquez in her corner. She gets her down. She stays on top. And then Barboza starts to get a little bit tired. And then in the very end, it's classic Nunes. She's just going in there and hammering away and then finishes the fight. She did the same thing in her last fight against Zbonik. And she did it in the fight before that against Araujo, who was coming in there, pro debut for her. They struck, and the really weird thing about that one was you had Nunes, who held Araujo in just a guillotine up against the cage, and Araujo was a lot taller. You'd think with a taller opponent, geez, that'd be pretty easy to get out of, but it wasn't, and I'm not joking. 4.5 minutes of my life were spent watching Nunes hold that in. Then the second round comes out, Araujo's tired, and she gets finished by Nunes. So for Nunes, not the highest level of competition, good strikers. So Matt, the original Josiane Nunes, the nickname is Josi. The debut was supposed to be at UFC Fight Night, Whitaker versus Gastelum. She was supposed to take on Farron missed weight, and Josiane Nunes hasn't fought since, so this is a welcome back. We did go in the time machine. What about Bea Malecki? Now, she's a really interesting case. She didn't have any pro MMA fights before the Ultimate Season, or Ultimate Fighter Season 28 Heavy Hitters, which is weird, and I've never in Fight Night Picks history put an asterisk next to a record on the show. But if you go into ESPN's website and the UFC's website, they're kind of in cahoots with the way that the records work, because if you're on or in a 3-round fight on the Ultimate Fighter, even though it's an exhibition fight, they'll count it on your record. So I kind of play here or there. Bea Malecki has 2 pro fights that weren't on the Ultimate Fighter. They're both in the UFC. They're both wins. They're both weird, too.
They are.
And let's let you take over.
Bea Malecki, I don't ever know if she's a good fighter, if she is just big for this weight division, because that's the first thing that I need to get out of the way before we do anything. The whole season of that heavyweight and, like, the women's 145ers, it just didn't really work out. And I know the Ultimate Fighter, it's back now. There's Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega. I don't know about you, Craig, but personally, I probably haven't been following along as closely as I should be.
I don't give a rat's behind.
There you go. But for Robert Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum, I did watch a little bit. You know, I was interested to see. I thought that was going to be a good middleweight title fight. No one from that season still fights at 145, and I think that's a really big issue. Like, everybody either went down to 135 where there is a division, or they just got let go from the UFC and eventually went to Bellator. Now, luckily for Bea Malecki, her and Macy Chiasson, luckily they can make the 135-pound weight division.
And Penny Kanzat.
And Penny Kanzat, exactly. See, I knew I was forgetting someone. But the difference is that Bea Malecki's level of competition, at least up until this point, hasn't been near those other two fighters.
Well, this is the crazy thing. For Bea Malecki, her UFC debut, it's close to home. She takes on Duda Santana. She is an underdog quite heavily. Duda Santana looked amazing in that fight. She was only like 22 years old. She didn't look like it, but she was great in that fight. She was pumping the jab. She was throwing in combinations. She had her way. In the first round, she looked amazing. She was definitely deserving of the odds that were placed on her. Second round, Duda Santana starts out really, really powerfully. She pushes Malecki up against the cage. She torques for a takedown. And then Malecki ends up on top of her. Malecki just lands some punches. And that's the end of the fight.
And this kind of comes back to my Bea Malecki theory. Does she win fights because she is the much larger fighter in some cases? Because
she softens her up and she submits her. But the point is, it was just a really weird fight where Malecki was losing until she won there.
There was someone, I forget the other fighter who I brought this up in one of their fights, but I remember saying they might only win this because they're significantly bigger. This is the thing, Bea Malecki, she throws strikes to keep range or to maintain range, but she can't maintain range. Her opponents don't have respect for her power a lot of the times. That's the real issue with Bea Malecki. Her strikes might look good, and yes, well, technically they are all probably, like, they have good technique behind them. None of her opponents respect her power, and since they don't respect her power, they can crash into her constantly, and that really is the big problem with Bea Malecki. I think if she did have the Muay Thai background that we talk about... No. Just let me elaborate. If she fought like someone who had her Muay Thai background, if she was someone who could work behind the jab, crash in with elbows, throw a lot of leg kicks, then I feel really confident picking Bea Malecki in future fights. But the problem with Malecki is she resorts to just kind of throwing a lot of jabs, and her opponents rush forward. And the problem is, if you have a Muay Thai background, you have ways to negate some of these techniques. Like, she should have a much better clinch than from what we've seen in the UFC. She should have better distance strikes from what we've seen in the UFC. And for all these reasons, I could see Josiane Nunes winning a very boring decision of using a lot of cage control against Bea Malecki. I think it's easy to move forward on Bea Malecki, and I think that if Josiane Nunes can avoid the big shot, which is honestly like fairly easy against Bea Malecki, I think she can win sort of a boring, drawn-out fight.
When I look at this one for Bea Malecki, you talked about it, let's really get in depth. So she was on the Swedish national team for Muay Thai. She is a Swedish and European and world champ. She's also a full-fledged mechanical engineer.
Which is very impressive.
That's crazy because I couldn't hack it in chemical engineering, so good for her with mechanical. But she's somebody that I've seen kind of cross-train with a lot of different fighters. She had a really interesting corner her last time out. It was Cheyenne Bays, and I've seen her training in the States with the Bays family, I guess, her and JP. These were the words that were used because Saif Saud wasn't in her corner last fight against Veronica Macedo. And if you go back and watch that fight, it's kind of a tale of two strikers because for as good as Macedo is on the ground, she is and primarily has always been a Taekwondo fighter. So it's Taekwondo versus Muay Thai. And in the first round, Macedo looks great. She's on fire. But the trouble was, Macedo's not a 135er. She took that fight at 35. She expended her gas tank in the first round. And then in the second round, the third round, Malecki's a bigger fighter. She's more conditioned for the weight class. And she's able to just kind of take over and pick apart. And she doesn't fall for, Macedo pulling guard or Macedo trying for some of the submissions. This is what Cheyenne Bay said in the corner between the first and the second round. Now, no Saif Saud, but she gave the coach Saif, mantra. You better light that fire in your ass right now. We're in Brazil. And where does she live? She lives in Brazil. No, she doesn't. Veronica Macedo's from Colombia.
Yeah.
And she doesn't live there. She spent a lot of time in the States, too.
I think Safe Sound wouldn't have said those words.
Well, I don't know. But when I look at this one, for Bea Malecki, the combinations that I picked up going back and watching the fights, it's a lot of 1-1-2. 1-1-2. Jab, jab, cross. Jab, jab, cross. Close the distance. Not a ton of kicks. For Josiane Nunes, all she does is rush forward and take chances.
And honestly, that's probably enough to beat Bea Malecki. This is the problem. The fact that we're throwing it up to Nunes just moving forward could win this fight, or the fact that Bea Malecki has, a 7-inch height advantage could win her this fight. I don't really think there's a lot more technique to break down than that. Like, Bea Malecki is a fighter who needs her range, and this highlight was on Twitter today, so it's just fresh in my mind. When Ross Pearson knocked out Gray Maynard, Ross Pearson, at distance, he's used a lot of jabs, he has really good boxing, similar to Gray Maynard. But when Gray Maynard takes a step in, a lot of guys, even boxers especially, when you move in, they have power on the inside to hurt you and make you pay for moving forward. Bea Malecki, unless you're standing at the extent of the range of her punches, she doesn't have any of that power, any of those inside moves. Like, that's the problem with Bea Malecki. If she had this crazy Muay Thai game, and if she was so good at Muay Thai, like Anderson Silva, for instance, he was somebody who I don't even believe had one World Muay Thai Championship. He still beat Rich Franklin twice by just using the Muay Thai clinch, because he has those inside weapons. And those are things I don't think Bea Malecki possesses. The last thing I'm going to say, though, and this is the honest truth, I still think Bea Malecki's going to win this because she's the bigger fighter. I don't think Josiane Nunes has the wrestling that a fighter like Jessica Andrade had at this weight division. Because you'll remember, Jessica Andrade beat Raquel Pennington at 135, and she herself is only like 5'2". The difference is that Jessica Andrade, A, might be pound for pound the most physically strong fighter in the UFC, and I'm not joking at all. She lifts chicks over her head and slams them down. But she also does have a very, very in-depth and very diverse jiu-jitsu and wrestling game, and that's why she was able to be successful. I think Nunes has some of those aspects, but I don't think she's nearly as polished of a fighter as Jessica Andrade was. So for those reasons, I think Bea Malecki's going to win.
It's weird because, and I want to give credit where credit's due, because I know somewhere out there they're listening, but ASMR Critique left a couple of really good comments yesterday about this fight. I screenshotted them to my phone because I wanted to bring them up. First one, I agree that Nunes' ground game is very subpar, but Diane Barboza is an expert at jiu-jitsu. She was a fighter that had Danilo Marquez in her corner, who just competed at Submission Underground last weekend. And by the second round, her jiu-jitsu fell apart. She was exhausted, and for that, it shows that Nunes overcomes, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. As far as level of competition, Nunes fought all undefeated fighters in her last 4 fights, a combined 9-0. One more thing to mention, Nunes' fight against Tyler Santos was many years ago, 7 or 8 years. Nunes wasn't even the same fighter back then. It took her a whole 2 years to fight again, and then she took another 2.5 years off before her next fight. This is where her career really began.
He's defending Josiane Nunes like I defend Kyle Lowry. Something's going on right now.
Almost 5 years after Tyler Santos. Since then, Nunes is 5-0 with 5 stoppages. And like I said, her last 4 fights were all against undefeated fighters.
Is it her brother?
I like all... it might be Josiane Nunes' brother. I don't know. But they're all very good points about Nunes. I think she's one of those fighters that rushes in, takes a lot of chances. To me, and it's a cheap comparison, and it's not because they're both Brazilian, but it's because they're both very green and coming in against names that people recognize. Melissa Gatto, when she came in against Victoria Leonardo, it was like, I haven't seen Gatto in a long time, and she didn't look very good in her other fights. And for Josiane Nunes, it's, well, the competition was decent. It's really tough to tell. So let's have a look at the odds. We'll offer you up those. Malecki open a -130 favorite. She's -154 right now. Nunes open a +110. She's a +127. If we have a look at the Topology votes, surprise to me, there to you. 1,042 total votes. 73% Malecki, 84% by decision. For the 27% that have Nunes, 46% by decision, 41% by knockout. I think Josiane Nunes wins a decision in this fight if she wins the first round, which I think she can, and I think that she can win the second round. So I've got Josiane Nunes. I think this fight's going to decision.
I think you're probably right, but again, in my mind's eye, it is a lot of Nunes moving forward. And when you are the shorter fighter getting into a lot of clinch exchange with the bigger fighter, all they have to do is pull underhooks, and you're exerting like 9 times the energy they are. Just by them being tall and gravity working against you, it's constantly going to be pulling up on your shoulders and burning your arms out. And again, I hate it when this is the reason that I think a fighter fighter is going to win, but I truly don't believe Bea Malecki is going to go on and have like a Macy Chiasson type of a career. Like, I truly, like, Macy can beat pretty much anyone in the top 15, right? Like, I understand there's some matchups that are tough for her, but for the most part, she's a good ranked fighter in that division. I think Bea Malecki can win favorable matchups and where her size can really win out, and I think this is going to be one of those fights. Again, I can't disagree with anything that you've said up until this point, but I think the UFC knows what they're doing. She's beaten fighters the similar size of Nunes, who, listen, Nunes I think is more skilled than Veronica Macedo, I guess. So I guess Bea Malecki's going to win this fight. A lot of guessing going on in this prediction.
Matt's got Bea Malecki. I'm going with Brazil's Josiane Nunes. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight. It's a great card. Headline by top 10 middleweights. Jared Cannonier taking on Kelvin Gastelum. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.